Hi and welcome back. This presentation is about a modern Greek writer, Nikos Kazantzakis, who is noted for his contribution to modern Greek literature. So, looking into the early life, the biographical details of Nikos Kazantzakis, he was born on February 18th, 1883, at Crete, in the then Ottoman Empire, which was now in Greece. And he passed away on the 26th of October 1957 in Western Germany. He is a Greek writer who has made wonderful contributions or a prolific output and wide variety of work, and he represents a major contribution to a modern Greek literature. So, the early life of Kazantzakis, he was born during the period of revolt of Crete against rule by the Ottoman Empire. So, he was born in a port city on the northern coast of the island of Crete. And Kazantzakis, he grew up during a particularly turbulent period in the history of Crete, when the nationalist rebels were struggling to overthrow their Turkish rulers, and they wanted to return the island to Greek control. In 1897, these rebel insurrections led to open warfare between Greece and the Ottoman Empire, which included Turkey, forcing the Kazantzakis family to flee and seek refuge on Naxos. Naxos is a small Greek island that was relatively unaffected by this fighting. And later, Crete became an autonomous state under the auspices of the Ottoman Empire in the year 1898. And when peace was restored, his family they returned back to Crete in 1899. So, after completing his secondary education, he decided to study law and he joined the University of Athens. He began to write fiction and dramas during this period of his college life, and he published his first work. The first work was a romantic novella, Serpent and Lily, which was published in 1906, shortly after receiving his law degree. And then the following year, he went to Paris to study law. And while in Paris, he got an opportunity to attend the lectures of Henri Bergson at the Collège de France, and he was greatly impressed with this French philosopher's ideas. And he considered himself to be a disciple of Bergson. After that, from France, he came back to Greece in 1909 and he began to write verse dramas and also began to translate works written by Bergson, Nietzsche, William James, Charles Darwin, and so on. And he also traveled widely across Europe in Spain, England, Russia, even going to Egypt, to Palestine, Japan. So he wrote articles about his travel experiences, about his excursions. And then before the Second World War began, he settled on the island of Aegina. So, apart from that, his involvement in the country, the public life of his native place, he was the minister in Greek government. He was also a very active worker in UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization that's headquartered in Paris. So, during 1922, he got an opportunity to travel to Berlin. So, in this travel to Berlin, he was very much influenced by the political philosophy of Karl Marx, Marxism, and he participated in the leftist discussion groups. Soon afterwards, we find that Kazantzakis, he began promoting Marxism in his travels throughout Europe. As he traveled across Europe, he also tried to propagate and promote Marxist ideas. And these activities of his, we find it is chronicled in an autobiographical novel called Toda Raba, which was published in 1934. So that is how we find the involvement of autobiographical elements into his novel. But even though in the initial phase he was quite interested in Marxism, but later on there's a trend where we find that he was disillusioned with Marxism. That's in 1925 when he visited Soviet Union to witness firsthand the benefits of Marxism, and 2 years later he returned to Moscow to participate in the celebration which marked the 10th anniversary of the October Revolution. However, Kazantzakis, he was quite disenchanted and disillusioned with Marxism and, in fact, with all existing ideological systems in light of the then worsening political and economic situation of Europe in the 1930s. That is the period when the dictatorships of Italy and Germany, that is Hitler and Mussolini, were ruling Europe, the 1930s. So such a turbulent period for Europe, and he lost his belief in all sorts of established ideological systems. So after that, let's look into the major works of Kazantzakis, or what is his contribution to modern Greek literature. He is quite a very prolific writer. He's written lots of works, including philosophic essays, even travel books on his travel experiences, tragedies. He has translated into modern Greek the classical works of Dante, like Divine Comedy or Goethe's Faust, and he produced a lyric poetry and the epic Odyssey or Odyssey. So that is actually a very important work. It has got 33,333 lines, and it is a sequel to the Homeric epic that expresses the full range of Kazantzakis' philosophy. His entire philosophy on life is reflected in this epic poem. So this is a massive verse epic. It is a modern sequel of Odyssey. It came out in 1938. So he created the first version of the poem between 1924 and 1927. But then he completely rewrote it. 4 times he rewrote it for the next 11 years. So such a long time he worked on it. So, and accordingly, he altered the content to reflect his own disillusionment with the political situations, as well as his own increasing concern for the spiritual well-being of mankind, for modern humanity. And there are critics who assert that the Odyssey, it functions at an allegorical as well as at an autobiographical level. Because in this verse, each episode is an allegory of a stage of the soul, and all of these are held together or like stitched, threaded together on a series of mythic themes. So Odysseus progresses, it goes through 7 stages, such as the 7 stages that the Odysseus progresses through are bestiality, battle hunger, lust, pure intellect, then despair, then detachment, and finally pure soul. So, but however, we have critics who disagree in their interpretations of the poem's reading. Some regard Odysseus' solitary death as Kazantzakis' comment on life's ultimate meaninglessness. He says life is ultimately meaningless. While there are other critics who construe Odysseus' withdrawal as the triumph of man's soul over both his physical existence and the random disasters that endanger it. So the Odyssey, upon its publication, the attention it got immediately was quite less. And it was not until the final decade of his life that Kazantzakis began to publish the novels. And he is largely remembered today for his novels. So his later novels are of course quite important. So even though Kazantzakis regarded the Odyssey to be his masterpiece, critics consider Kazantzakis' later novels to be more appealing and more significant because it more clearly highlights his literary aims and his philosophy. And critics have also praised the profound understanding of the human condition that is displayed in these novels. And they have also praised Kazantzakis' affirmations of the value of human life or value of human existence. Then, in addition, many suggest that Kazantzakis he has used modern thematic Greek. Rather than using the accepted standard literary language, he uses just the ordinary language, the Demotic Greek, and it represents a significant advancement in the development of Greek literature. So, long popular in his native country in Greece, but then he began to acquire worldwide fame and prestige when his novels began to be translated to several other languages. And the three most important novels, that is Zorba the Greek, the Greek Passion, and the Last Temptation of Christ. These three novels later even served the basis for film. So, with these novels becoming into films, it got a greater audience, greater popularity, and worldwide acclaim. So, now we're going to examine some of the major novels and the major themes that he has dealt with in his novels. So, as I told you before, Kazantzakis, he is best known for his widely translated and widely read novels. So, the most prominent novels are in 1946, you have Zorba the Greek. That is a portrayal of a passionate lover of life and a poor man's philosopher. So, already Nikos Kazantzakis was well known as a political activist or as a cultural ambassador, as a translator, but he gained popular success as a novelist with the publication of Zorba the Greek in 1946. So, Kazantzakis, he wrote this autobiographical work during the early part of the decade. He wrote it as a tribute to his close friend George Zorba, with whom he had undertaken a mining venture in Crete back in 1917. So it is said that the author, as quoted by George T. Carnezes in the Carnete series in English, he says, the author himself says that he felt possessed, the broadest soul, the soundest body, and the freest cry I have known in my life. And the narrator of this novel, Zorba the Greek, is accepted by critics as a self portrait of Kazantzakis as an artist and also as a philosopher. So that is Zorba the Greek. Then another one, 1950, Freedom or Death. That is a depiction of Cretan Greeks' struggle against their Ottoman overlords in the 19th century. Then in 1954, the novel The Greek Passion. And in 1955, we have The Last Temptation of Christ. That is a revisionist psychological study of Jesus Christ. It's published after his death. We have the autobiographical novel 1961, Report to Greco. So, as I told you, a lot of films, motion pictures based on these works have also been produced, which added to his popularity. So, now looking into the major features of his works or his beliefs, his philosophy that is reflected in his works, Kazantzakis, for him, God is not dead, as Nietzsche proclaimed. Rather, God is waiting to be created by people who think they need him. So the search for God becomes one of the ways in which existential people seek to create meaning for their lives. So Kazantzakis' heroes are often dramatizations of existential people who are trying to face up to the fact that God, as he has traditionally been conceived, doesn't exist at all. Rather than being overwhelmed by such knowledge, however, the hero, what he does is that the hero simply posits the existence of God, one created more in his own image rather than in the traditional Judeo-Christian image. So the Greek author Nikos Kazantzakis, he's best remembered as the author of Zorba the Greek and the Last Temptation of Christ, and many such other philosophical novels that we've discussed, in which, in all of these novels, he explores the spiritual and intellectual anguish of modern humanity. Throughout his life, he espoused he rejected many traditional beliefs, and he ultimately developed a personal philosophy that drew heavily on the ideas of philosophers like Henry Bergson and Friedrich Nietzsche. They have influenced him so much. And he views existence as a constant struggle of opposing forces, which affirming the progressive nature of human development. So Kazantzakis' philosophy also included elements of Christianity, but later we find that elements of skepticism, which is characteristic of modern thought or modern literature, modern philosophy, so elements of skepticism also slowly begin to creep in. And the way he has treated religious subjects, he has treated these religious subjects in quite an unorthodox manner. So, these religious subjects and themes he has dealt with in an unorthodox manner, and he has also evoked censure from representatives of established religions. Kazantzakis' writing is often appraised as a single body, and that reveals the author's philosophical and spiritual values. There are critics who agree, a lot of critics agree that his writings, at least they are partially autobiographical. But although Kazantzakis' works, they seek to reconcile the dualities of human nature, that is, mind and body, affirmation and despair, even life and death is reconciled. There are some critics who have suggested that the author's ultimate concern lies more in striving to overcome inherent human conflicts rather than resolving these human conflicts. So, as he has dealt with a lot of religious themes in his works, he has provoked much controversy. So, the controversy regarding Kazantzakis' heterodox Christianity began actually with the publication of The Greek Passion in 1954. In this novel, the modern Christian church is depicted as an ossified institution that has ceased to embody the teachings of Jesus Christ. And then further, Kazantzakis, this theme, he developed it further in The Last Temptation of Christ. That is a psychological study of Jesus Christ, sort of a surrealistic fictional biography of Christ, whom Kazantzakis considered to be the supreme embodiment of man's battle to overcome his sensual desires in pursuit of a much more spiritual existence. And the novel focuses on what Kazantzakis imagines as the psychological aspects of Jesus' character and how Christ is able to overcome his human limitations to finally unite with God. So, despite facing a much harsh criticism about his religious or theological viewpoint, Kazantzakis, he also enjoyed much popular as well as critical acclaim throughout this latter portion of his career. And in 1957, the year of his death from complications of lymphoma when he passed away, but he was already nominated for the Nobel Prize for Literature. So the world, of course, even though it took some time for the world to recognize him, but finally he became a world-renowned novelist. So in his works, we can also find the influence of Friedrich Nietzsche and Henry Bergson, the prominent philosophers of the time who have influenced the thought of Kazantzakis. The author was especially interested in the concepts that Nietzsche outlined in The Birth of Tragedy, wherein Nietzsche postulated that the primary tension in the human nature is the tension that exists between man's physical drives and his intellectual and spiritual impulses. And this idea, there's this conflict between the physical desires of man and his spiritual impulses, is a core theme of many of the works of Kazantzakis. The author was also profoundly interested in Bergson's concept of progressive spiritual development. And he says this progressive spiritual development is a man's attempt to escape the constraints of this physical and social existence and unite with the elan vital. Elan vital is the universal creative force. So, in his works, Kazantzakis' works, Serpent and Lily, that focused on a young man's struggle to balance the physical and spiritual elements of his love for a woman. And The Saviors of God, Spiritual Exercises, that is an essay in which the author explains his early philosophical beliefs and concerns, in which we can very clearly find the influences of these two philosophers, that is Nietzsche and Bergson. As do many of Kazantzakis' subsequent works show the influence of these philosophers. Then, yet another core theme that Kazantzakis has explored in his works is the spiritual plight of mankind. And this concern is most explicitly manifested in the novels Zorba the Greek and The Last Temptation of Christ. In Zorba the Greek, Kazantzakis presents two characters, and these two characters exemplify the two poles, the two extremes of that conflict. Zorba, who represents a central figure, while the man known as the boss, he embodies the more high minded intellectual spiritual traits. In The Last Temptation of Christ, the conflict is portrayed as the essential dilemma of Christ, because when Christ is torn between his wish to serve God and his physical appetites. So, characteristically, Kazantzakis, he does not attempt to present a resolution to this conflict between the sensual and the spiritual in these novels. For instance, Zorba and his boss, they learn from their exchange of ideas, but part is essentially unchanged. While in Christ, even as he is sacrificing himself on the cross, Christ dreams of leading the sensually satisfying life of an ordinary man. So, that conflict between the sensual and the spiritual is a predominant theme of many of his works. So, so we find that from all of these, we can say in conclusion that Kazantzakis, he is definitely a unique voice in modern literature. So that position as being a unique author is of course uncontested. Critical opinion about the literary quality of his individual works is frequently divided. There are different varying critical opinions. Many critics hold the view that Kazantzakis subordinated his artistic concerns to the philosophical ideas, and he was expressing his philosophy through his novels rather than being concerned about the artistic quality. While some critics admire this philosophy, what they consider the passionate, poetic, visionary voice with which the author communicates with his readers. And there are critics who further appreciate the realistic descriptions, the metaphors, the detailed, profuse imagery that is a very important component of Kazantzakis' writing style. So, as a result, Kazantzakis, he is an important, a much discussed figure in the world of literature. He reflects the traditional culture of his native place, Crete, at the same time exemplifying the larger philosophical concerns of modern European intellectual community. And we do accept him as a classical author because of the relevance, the universality of these themes that he has expounded through his philosophical works, his verses, or his most popular novels. So that is about the Greek, the modern Greek author Kazantzakis. So that is all. Thank you.